Shalom, Boker Tov, Erev Tov, Laila Tov, wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Today, the 22nd day of the month of Tammuz of this year of redemption, 5774, the 28th of July 2016. Welcome back to Azamra's Internet Kollel for a new session today. Today, 22nd of Tammuz 5776, corresponding to the 28th of July 2016. We are returning to our studies of Daniel and picking up the story from where we left off yesterday towards in the later part of chapter 1 of the book of Daniel. And we'd followed through the story of the first exile of the very cream of Judah, the priests, the prophets, the leading members of the society of Jerusalem under King Jehoiachin. This was 11 years before the destruction of the temple of King Solomon, and Nebuchadnezzar left in charge in Jerusalem King Zedekiah with a generation that, according to our sages, King Zedekiah was actually righteous, but he was surrounded by people who were far from righteous, and that was what led to the final destruction of the temple. But the people who went in the first exile with Jehoiachin were many outstanding tzaddikim, as I mentioned, Daniel himself and his companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and also such as the prophet Ezekiel and many other great people. And Daniel was perhaps the greatest of all of them. And we saw yesterday how King Nebuchadnezzar summoned the children of Judah, some of the leading children, to be taken in for 3 years of preparation to go into the court of Nebuchadnezzar, and to be, he wanted to see who they were, what they were. And let us pick up the story again from chapter 1. Here we are in verse 18, but let's start from verse 16 in the Hebrew text, Tet Vav, and we saw that in the previous verse 15 of Daniel chapter 1, after 10 days, the appearance of these lads, these youngsters, Daniel and his friends, was better, and their flesh, their bodies were more healthy than all of the other children that were eating the defiled bread of the royal household. Verse 16, Vayhi hameltzar noseh et pas bogom v'yein mishteyem v'noisen lohem zer oinim. The Meltzar, the person that was to serve them the food, took away the royal bread and the wine of the idolatrous libations, which was the normal food, and gave them instead bread, gave them just no bread, just zer onim. Zer onim is the Hebrew word for things like beans of various kinds. והילודים האלה ארבעתם נוסן להם האלוהים מדו וישכיל בכל ספר וחוכמה. And these 4 children, God gave them mado, knowledge, haskil, intelligence, understanding, bechol sefer v'chochma, in every book and every wisdom. And particularly Daniel is singled out. Daniel hevin b'chol chozon v'chaloimois. Daniel had understanding of all visions and dreams. Once again, we see the parallel between Daniel and Joseph. Daniel as now one that is able to understand and interpret dreams. And the text continues, Ulamikzos hayomim asher omar hamelech lahaviyom, after the number of days that the king had given instructions to bring them, vayiviyim sar hasorisim lifnei Nebuchadnezzar. The captain over all of the ministers and officers brought them into Nebuchadnezzar. Vaydaber itom hamelech v'lo nimtzo mikulom kedoniel Hananiah Mishoel v'Azario. So the king spoke with them, with all of the group of children, those who had eaten the regular food and those 4 that abstained from it. And out of all of them, when the king spoke with them, Lo nimtza mikulam kedaniel Hananiah Mishael v'Azariah. There was not found among all of them like Daniel, Hananiah, and Mishael and Azariah. Vaya'amdu lifnei hamelech. They stood before the king. This is both literally and figuratively. Not only do they stand the long hours in court, as is appropriate before a king seated on his throne, they also, they stood, they had the ability to withstand the challenges of court life. V'chol devar chochmas bino asher bikesh mehem amelech vayimtzoeim eser yodos al kol hachartumim hoashofim asher b'chol malchusoi. Every matter of Chochmas Bino, the wisdom of understanding, which the king requested from them, he found them 10 times better than all of the wizards and sorcerers in his entire kingdom. These 2 words, Chartumim, is the same word that appears in connection with the Exodus from Egypt, when Pharaoh was surrounded by his Chartumim, his sorcerers, wizards, sages, wise men, whatever you wish to call them. Hoashofim has the connotation of sorcerers also. I find it very significant that the Hebrew word, which is the root here of Ho'ashofim, is Aleph, Shin, Pei, and those are indeed the initial letters of the official Hebrew name of the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, Irgun Shichrur Palestina. So here also we have this connotation of the wizards and sorcerers, who include the people behind those guys. Vayhi Daniel ad shenas achas lechoresh amelech. The concluding verse of this chapter, verse 21, goes to the wider picture and tells us, Vayhi Daniel endured ad shenas achas lechoresh amelech, until the first year of Koresh the king. Well, here let us take a look at what our commentator Rashi has to say. Rashi tells us on verse 21, Vayhi Daniel begedula bevovel ad shenas achas lekoresh melech. Daniel was in a state of greatness. His prime position endured until the first year of King Cyrus. Now, there is an ambiguity about who exactly we're talking about when we speak about Koresh, because there were actually, let's just say from the outside that Babylon was conquered by Darius, king of the Medes. Dariavesh is the Hebrew name of Darius, and Darius of the Medes is called Darius Harishon, the first Darius. That is to distinguish him from the second Darius, who was the son of Achashverosh by Esther, Queen Esther, and he's also referred to, both are they're referred to as Koresh. In other words, I hope I've not confused you. Esther's son Darius is also referred to as Koresh because Koresh apparently was the name of the Persian kings, just as Paro, Pharaoh, was the name of the Egyptian kings. But Darius the first of Media was succeeded by the first Koresh. That is the Darius, who was his son-in-law, Cyrus, Koresh, the king of Persia. So there was Darius of the Medes, followed by Cyrus the first. Then comes Achashverosh, and then comes the son of Achashverosh, called Darius the second, but also called Cyrus, Koresh. So let's read the Rashi here to understand how long did Daniel maintain his greatness. L'divrei ha'omer chasach ze Daniel. According to the opinion in the Talmud, tractate Megillah on page 15, Hasach mentioned in the Megillah as the messenger between Mordechai and Esther, that is Daniel. V'lama nikro shmo Hasach? Why was his name called Hasach? Because he was cut down from his greatness. So according to this opinion, that it was in the time of Esther that Daniel was cut down from his greatness, we would have to say that in our verse here in Daniel, which says that Daniel endured until the first year of Cyrus, we'd have to say that is Cyrus of Media, the first Darius. That would be the first Koresh, the first Koresh, not the Koresh of Persia, the son-in-law of Darius of the Medes. But there's another opinion in the Talmud, according to the opinion in the Talmud, that he was not cut down from his greatness, chatach, but that all affairs of state were decided according to his mouth, his opinion. Neymar Koresh zehu Daryovesh Asheni Asher Achar Achashverosh. We'd have to say that the Cyrus Koresh mentioned here in Daniel at the end of verse 21, that was the second Cyrus, namely the son of Achashverosh, son of Esther. According to this opinion, the second opinion, that Daniel survived all the way up to the second Koresh, the second Cyrus, son of Esther, we'd have to say that when Darius of Media, the first Darius, the one who conquered Babylon, when he threw Daniel into the lion's den, as we should be reading later on, Daniel did not lose his greatness after that. Shenemar, as it says in later on in the book of Daniel, chapter 6, verse 29, Daniel denor hatzlach b'malchus Daryovish v'malchus Koresh parso. Daniel had success, had eminence both in the reign of Darius of Media and also in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. From this we learn that it was in the days of Cyrus until the days of Cyrus II that Daniel remained in greatness. That is to indicate to us the outstanding greatness of Daniel, that according to the second opinion, that in our verse here in Daniel chapter 1 verse 21, Cyrus is referring to the second Cyrus, to the Cyrus son of Esther, who actually completed the building of the second temple in Jerusalem. This shows the phenomenal length of days enjoyed by Daniel and the greatness that he served all of these kings. We will see him now in the coming chapter, presently in the service of Nebuchadnezzar. And then we later in the book see that Daniel was in service to the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, when Daniel was called to interpret the writing on the wall. And then Daniel was a minister of Cyrus I of Persia, as we shall be reading, and later on in the book. And according to this, he maintained his influence until the building of the Second Temple, and that would corroborate the identification in Ezra of Daniel, mentioned at the beginning of Ezra as being present at the beginning of the Second Temple era in Jerusalem, with as being this our Daniel of our book. And it's no surprise that these individuals in those times were able to apparently move fairly freely across what was all one empire. Of course, under Nebuchadnezzar, things were under highly controlled. It was not possible for the Jews of Judea who were in exile in Babylon to travel very much. But after the fall of Babylon to Darius the Mede, who reigned for 1 year, and his power went to his son-in-law, Cyrus I of Persia. From that time on, as we see both in Daniel and also in Ezra and Nehemiah, passage between the different parts of the Persian Empire, between Babylon, between Shushan, and the western province of the land of Israel was free. It was probably quite dangerous. We see this indicated in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, but nevertheless one could get from place to place. So with that, we now come to the amazing chapter 2 of the book of Daniel. Chapter 2, which is going to narrate the story of the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. And after a very short time of narrative in Hebrew in chapter 2, we are very soon going to be moving into the Aramaic language, the very, very beautiful Aramaic language with its very august and stately movement. Well, the famous dream of Nebuchadnezzar is his dream of this extraordinary statue. Of course, he forgot both the dream and its interpretation, and as we should be reading presently, he issues his challenge to the sorcerers of Babylon. If you're so clever, come and tell me, what did I dream that was so making me so anxious? And what was the meaning of the dream? And none of them could, and only Daniel, through the power of his prayers and those of his companions, was able to understand the interpretation of the dream. And when Daniel finally was able to reveal the dream, he tells us that the dream of Nebuchadnezzar was about a great statue whose head was of gold and whose chest was of the upper chest and the arms were of silver. The lower chest was and the legs were of bronze, and the shins and down to the feet were of metal, and the feet themselves, the toes, were metal and earthenware. And at the end of the dream, we see how, as Nebuchadnezzar was contemplating this statue, he suddenly saw that a stone was hewn out, not by human hands, and it came crashing into the statue and brought the statue down, and everything was crushed. The stone crushed the whole statue, and then we see that everything was destroyed, and all that was left is the great mountain, which turns out, as we shall see at the end of the dream, was the Temple Mount. But now, the opening lines of our chapter identify when actually did this dream take place. The text tells us it was in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar that he had this dream. The second year of the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, and Rashi immediately tells us on verse 1 of chapter 2, it's impossible to understand this according to its simple meaning. But actually, says Rashi, when it says the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, it's alluding to its being the second year after the destruction of the temple. This is the conclusion of the Midrash Seder Olam that I've mentioned several times, the Midrash giving the rabbinical view of the chronology. And the Bible text is always very elusive, and when it says the second year of his reign, it's the second year after he had destroyed the temple. He has this dream, and in our text, chapter 2, verse 1, the Hebrew text says, as a result of this dream, I'm showing you now on your screen the verse 1 of Daniel chapter 2. There's so much commentary on the page that the actual biblical text itself is a mere few lines at the top of the page. But here's the end of here's the beginning of chapter 2, verse 1 of V'shnas Shtayim lemalchus Nebuchadnezzar, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Chalam Nebuchadnezzar chalomos. Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams. Vatis poem rucho, and his spirit was struck. The Hebrew term vatis poem has as its root pa'am. A pa'amon is a bell, the sound of which is made by the clangor knocking against the metal of the bell. And pa'am indicates some kind of blow or thud, except that the Hebrew term here, vatis poem, is a Hebrew hitpa'el form. And our sages have commented that we have here a term that is almost but not quite parallel to the same Hebrew expression that is used in the in Genesis at the beginning of the portion of Miketz, when Pharaoh has his dream. We see that Pharaoh in Genesis chapter 41 has his whole dream about the cows, the fat cows and the lean cows, the fat ears of corn and the lean ears of corn. And when Pharaoh awoke from his dream, he was stunned by the dream. And this is what the Torah tells us in verse in Genesis chapter 41, verse 8. Verse 8 of Genesis 41 says, "It was in the morning, and Pharaoh's ruach, Pharaoh's spirit, was struck, and then he sent and called for all the sorcerers of Egypt and all its wise men, told them his dream." So the Hebrew expression here of his spirit was struck is vati poem. Vati poem, as opposed to our text in Daniel, which says vatis poem. So our sages learn from this the difference between the dream of Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh, and the dreams of Nebuchadnezzar. Because when he woke up in the morning, the double taf here is darshaned in the Midrash to indicate that whereas Pharaoh remembered his dream, one taf, vati poem, Nebuchadnezzar forgot the dream as well. According to our sages, both Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar actually dreamed both the dream, and when they were asleep during the dream, they knew what it meant. When Pharaoh awoke, he remembered the dream but forgot the interpretation. When Nebuchadnezzar awoke, he had forgotten both the dream and the interpretation. And that is what now causes Nebuchadnezzar to go calling for all of the wise men of Babylon. And that's our text. We can follow through the text a little more rapidly in this section from the ensuing verses after chapter 2, verse 1 of Daniel. Daniel is struck in his spirit, and his sleep was destroyed, and the king said, gave orders to call all the Chartumim, the sorcerers, the Ashafim, the wizards, Lamachashvim, the Kastim, all of the different categories of occultists and people dealing with the esoteric in this kingdom of the Chaldeans, which was very much devoted to this kind of thing. And he called upon them to tell the king his dreams. They came, they stood before the king. Verse 3, the king said to them, I dreamed a dream, and my spirit has been struck to understand the dream. And in verse 4, we slip into Aramaic. The Kasdim said to the king in Aramaic, because they don't want all the common people to hear exactly what they're saying, their confession of ignorance and inability. Let me read some of the verses of the Aramaic. I'm reading now from verse 4. The verse starts in Hebrew but goes immediately into Aramaic from after the fifth word on with the verse in Hebrew. Vayedaberu hakastim lamelech Aromis. The Kasdim, the Chaldeans, spoke to the king in Aramaic. Malko leolemin cheyi, king, live forever. Emar chelmo la'avdoch ufishro nachave. Tell your dream to your servant, and we shall tell you the interpretation. Ole malko ve'oma lachasdoi milso mini azdo heloi zahoid unani chelmo fishrei hadominitis avadun votichoi nevole yit samun. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, this matter is coming forth from me, this very blatant threat of Nebuchadnezzar. If you don't inform me the dream and its interpretation, you will be turned into limbs, your bodies will be cut up to little pieces, and your homes, your houses will be made into a rubbish heap, trash heap. Ve'hein chelmo fishrei taharavon matnon unevizbo v'kor sagi tekablun min chodomoi. But if you're going to tell me the dream, then you will be receiving wonderful gifts from me and honor, extreme honor. Lahein chelmo ufishrei achavoini. Stop wasting my time. Just tell me the meaning of the dream. Ano sinionus v'omrin. So now the sorcerers answer back. Malko chelmo yemar lavdoi ufishro nachave. King, please tell us the dream to your servants, and we'll tell you the interpretation. Ane malko avomar min yatziv yoda ano di aidono anatun zovnin kol kovil di chazisoin di azdo mini milso. I see that the king answered. He said, I clearly know that you're just trying to buy time, all the while that you've seen that this decree has come forth from me. Hen chelmo loy sehoide onani. Harohi dos choin u milo chidavo shechiso. His damintun לממה קודמי, עד דעידונו ישתנה אלוהינו חלמו, אמרו לי ואינדו די פישרה תהפנוני. So he says to them, if you don't inform me the dream, the one law is, it's clear that this is the decree against you because you are telling something, you are lying and corrupt. To say to me, you want the times to change, and I'm not going to put up with this. Just get on with it. Tell me the dream, and I'll know that you are telling me the correct interpretation. So now, verse 10, Ano chastoi kodem malko v'amrin, the Chaldeans say before the king, Lo isai ena shal yabeshto di menas malko yuchal achavoyo. There's no man on dry land, on the earth, that can possibly tell you. Kol kevel di kol melech rav v'shalit, milo chideno lo yisha'al l'chol chaltom v'oshaf v'chasdoi. We see that there's been no great king and ruler who has ever asked such a matter of all of his wizards and sorcerers and Chaldeans. The thing that the king is asking, Yakiro, it's very dear, very precious, very weighty. There's no other that could possibly tell it before the king. Except for the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh at all. Here we see that they were clearly polytheistic. This is not simply an Aramaic equivalent to the Hebrew Elohim, which is used both of the one God and also in the phrase Elohim Acherim, other gods, for pagan gods. Here, because the other words in the sentence are clearly plural, they're talking about Elohim di Medorahoin, the gods whose Medorahon, the root here is Mador, dwelling place, and the Medorahon refers to their dwelling place. They do not have their dwelling place with flesh. So now, that was enough for Nebuchadnezzar, Kol Kovel Dano Malko Benas Uketzaf Sagi. So right then the king got into a raving fury. He said to destroy all these sages of Babylon. This is very characteristic of Nebuchadnezzar, an exceptionally cruel tyrant. The decree went out and the sages started getting killed. So Daniel and his friends were required to be executed. The message apparently came to Daniel and his friends that they too were included in this decree because nobody was helping out Nebuchadnezzar. At this dramatic moment, we shall leave this for today, and with the help of God in our next session, we shall be hearing what Daniel did on hearing about this terrible threat to himself and his friends and anybody sane, and how he was able to forestall the decree and actually come in and tell Nebuchadnezzar the meaning of his dream. Shalom again, my dear friends. We're now going to turn to the second component of our studies. Today, 22nd of Tammuz of the year 5776, corresponding to the 28th of July 2016. We continue now with our study of the Mishnah tractate of Sanhedrin, and we started yesterday with the first Mishnah, and just to make a very brief summary of what we learned, we are starting off on our exploration of the different levels of courts that would attend to various different legal issues in Israel of the halachic ideal. And Israel as it was in the times of the first and second temples. And we're starting from the bottom upwards. We started yesterday with our Mishnah telling us that financial cases of suing for loan repayment and the like can be conducted out of three dayanim, three judges. We learned that matters to do with robbery and damages, physical damages, property damages cases could be seen before three judges, and various other categories of cases that would come up on the level of things involving property. And at the end of the Mishnah yesterday, the end of the second part of the Mishnah, we started hearing about moving into the case into cases involving possible capital punishment, the death penalty. And I'd like to say at this moment, before we go on, that there is quite a difference between our modern day conceptions of how a legal system should work and how the Israelite legal system should work. The Torah system of law gives the supreme authority to the great Sanhedrin, who were giving their semicha, not necessarily literal laying on of hands, but ordination to their students who had been sufficiently examined and found to be wise and knowledgeable in all of the necessary areas. And as we are now hearing, they could constitute courts of either 3 people for monetary affairs and other less serious cases. There had to be 23 judges for capital cases and certain other cases, and the full Supreme Court of 71 members would adjudicate on the highest matters of state. And they were laying down the halacha, the law as it was to be fulfilled during the lives of the people of Israel. Let us understand that the king, about whom we should be learning in the second chapter, the king also has authority to impose what today people are calling law and order with mixed feelings. We actually find that the Torah rules about providing sufficient testimony in the case of murder or even theft and robbery are so scrupulous in requiring any case to be determined only on the evidence of 2 witnesses that according to rabbinic law, the Sanhedrins and Batei Din, the rabbinical courts we are talking about, were not authorized to impose penalties on circumstantial evidence. This is completely different from the way that the modern contemporary court system works, where often it's the impressions and the feelings of the judge based upon questions and perhaps some level of interrogation, but without very scrupulous requirements for testimony from valid witnesses. So according to Torah law, it can be quite difficult to actually nail somebody if you don't have all of the requisite evidence from 2 valid witnesses, etc. So this works fine in a society where there are a lot of people around, where the overwhelming majority are abiding of the halacha, and breaches of the halacha would be fairly exceptional. But as things deteriorated, we do learn indeed in the Talmud that towards the end of the Second Temple period, when there was a horrendous rise in murder, as reflected in the histories of Josephus, the Sanhedrin simply stopped adjudicating capital cases. However, as Maimonides brings in his Torah code, the Mishnah Torah, the king of Israel is vested in the authority to make exceptional rules where they're required by the times. The Sanhedrin also is authorized to make special rules where the situation demands. It is brought that in several generations for the end of the Second Temple, a huge number of witches were executed publicly, and this was not according to the full law of the Sanhedrin. But let us understand that the king, namely the political authority of the land, is vested with the ability, for example, where he and his sages see fit, to impose punishments on, say, a killer, a murderer, or some other danger to the community without the full requisites of Torah law as we shall be studying them. Nevertheless, for anybody who wishes to understand Torah law, it is necessary to learn the principles of Torah law as we are doing from the Mishnah. So now, a second point to be made here is that the apparatus of the various levels of Bet Din, whether it's 3 or 23 or 71, if you have a case against somebody, under Torah law, you don't have a judicial system that is basically a judiciary under the government, which has a public prosecutor to follow up on cases of criminality and so on. Under Torah law, you have free citizens living in a society where if somebody does something wrong, another citizen or other citizens with the due witnesses will sue that person to the Bet Din. So, for example, let's now turn to the latter part of the first Mishnah of Sanhedrin, which we were looking at yesterday, and I'm going to go through from the last section, which speaks about the cases of the ones, the rapist, hamafateh, the seducer, the hamotzi shem ra, the person that brings forth a bad name on a girl that he has married, that she had had illicit relations prior to their marriage when she was presented to him as a virgin. So in these 3 laws, in the case of a rapist, he's raped her. There's not much to argue about. According to biblical law, he has to pay a fine and may have to marry her. The same with the seducer, is going to have to pay a fine. And the presumption is in our Mishnah that we're dealing with a young maiden. In Mishnah times, the girls were married often at the age of 12, coinciding with their puberty, and we have to accept the conditions that the Mishnah is dealing with as they are without trying to judge them by latter-day criteria. The third case here, after the rapist and the seducer, the one about Motzi Shem Ra. Well, if it turned out that his claim is wrong, he's going to have to pay compensation and keep his wife. But if it turns out that his claim is correct and his wife indeed did have immoral relations before their marriage and deceived him into believing she was a virgin, then she is up against this is now a capital case. So this is the source of the mahloket, the division of opinion between the first opinion we come to now, Rabbi Meir, and the opinion of other sages. The first opinion is that these 3 cases, the rapist, the seducer, and the person that accuses his wife of having had illicit relations, will be heard in a court of 3 rabbis, because assuming the girl is innocent, it's not a capital case. The husband is going to be disproved. She was a virgin. There's no evidence she did anything wrong, and he will have to pay the requisite penalties. So Rabbi Meir says in the first instance, this case will be heard before 3 judges. So far, it's only a financial case. Hachomim omrim motzi shem ra be'esrim u'shloisho. However, the Chachamim, where the Mishnah mentions the sages, that doesn't mean that all the other sages were against Rabbi Meir. It just means that some other opinions by rabbis who are not specified for reasons known to the author of the Mishnah, why he did not say their names. He said the names of the name of the individual who diverged, but the others are not mentioned. The other sages say that in the case of somebody who brings out a bad name on his wife, that has to be judged in front of a court of 23. And the reason is, they give it in the Mishnah, because this involves dinei nefoshos, laws of nefashot, of souls, of a possible capital penalty. At the beginning of the Mishnah, dinei momonos, all the cases heard in front of 3 judges only are momoin, money, finance. But here, the opinion of the sages is that even from the beginning of this case of the person that brings out a bad name against his wife, from the very outset, he must bring his accusation in front of what is called a Sanhedrin Ketano, a small Sanhedrin, one of 23 members. The Sanhedrin Gedolah is the 71-member Sanhedrin of the great Sanhedrin, the highest supreme authority. Esrim v'shlosha, 23, that is called Sanhedrin Ketano, a small Sanhedrin, and we should be hearing more about that later on. But having now completed the end of the first Mishnah of Sanhedrin with thanks to God, let us now go forward into the second Mishnah, continuing with the numbers constituting a valid bed din for different cases. Makois. Makois means blows, specifically referring to the penalty of lashes, 39 lashes that will be given in the case of somebody who transgressed one of the TORAH prohibitions that does not involve the death penalty. For example, if a person was seen cooking meat and milk together, or if they were seen putting on a garment that had a mix of wool and linen in its fabric. So these are 2 TORAH prohibitions that do not involve the death penalty. And if the person was witness doing this, and the witnesses, prior to his performing the act, he was warned, he was given due warning, you are wanting to violate a TORAH prohibition of cooking meat and milk together, or of wearing wool and linen together, don't do it. And if he does it anyway, flagrantly, he's going to be liable to the penalty of makot, of lashes, 39 lashes, as is taught in the TORAH in the book of Deuteronomy. And the Talmud, the Mishnah tractate after Sanhedrin, that of Makot, the very name we have the same word here. Makot, the tractate after Sanhedrin, deals with the laws relating to the administration of the lashes, how it was done, how many exactly. So any such cases would have to be adjudicated in front of 3 judges. That is the first opinion. The first opinion is not ascribed to any particular rabbi. It is what is called a stam mishnah. Stam, the word stam means closed up with no further elaboration who actually said it. The first opinion of the Mishnah, lashes administered by 3. Mishum Rabbi Ishmael Amru. In the name of Rabbi Ishmael, they said, the people heard it from him, his students said, Be'esrim u'shloisha, no, any cases involving lashes should be conducted in front of a court of 23 judges. So the reason would be, each side in this controversy comes to their conclusion based upon deductions from the biblical texts, which I will not go into in detail, but let us understand that none of these opinions is simply something that the Tana came up with by himself. In each case, they have made the deductions from the biblical text, but our purpose in this series is not to go in depth into matters of limud that require intricate knowledge of the biblical text in Hebrew. Our purpose here is to grasp the main principles of Torah law. And our Mishnah is now moving forward into other kinds of cases and how many judges they would be heard in front of. So now we're dealing with matters to do with the calendar. The next section of Mishnah 2 deals with Ibur HaChodesh. Ibur literally means pregnancy. The Chodesh is the month. Well, the Jewish calendar, the Torah calendar, goes according to the lunar cycle, and the lunar cycle, the moon circuits the earth in 29 and a half days and just a little over, and because of this, for reasons which we should be discussing at greater length when we come to study the tractate Rosh Hashanah, there are times when a month is 29 days and times when it has to be 30 days in order to overcome the discrepancies and make sure that we don't get out of hands with our months straying out of synchronization with the actual movements of the moon. So if the new moon is not observed on the night after the 29th day of any month, if the moon was observed on the night after the 29th, in other words, on the eve of what would be the 30th day of the month, if the new moon was observed by witnesses, they would come to Jerusalem and testify before the rabbinical court in Jerusalem. But if no witnesses came, if no witnesses arrived, if nobody observed the new moon on the eve of the 30th day, it means that the 30th day is going to remain part of the previous month. It will be the 30th day. It will not turn into the first day of the new month, and that is called Ibur HaChodesh. The previous month was pregnant. It had the extra day, the 30th day, and by default, the new month will start the following day. The 31st day will be the first day of the new moon. Well, that was not an arbitrary decision that could be made by one priest. That would have to have a bet din of 3 rabbis adjudicating. Ibur Ashana Bishloisha, Divrei Rabbi Meir. When it comes to leap years, Ibur Ashana, when the year is pregnant, the year has 12 months, and we are going to need a 13th month in order to bring the lunar cycle of months, which is only 354 days, into synchronicity with the solar year of 365 and a quarter days. From time to time, we have to have a Torah calendar leap year where there is 13 months, where the month of Adar is duplicated. And according to Rabbi Meir, this decision could be taken by a rabbinical court, a Beis Din of 3 sages. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. Now, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel was the head of Sanhedrin, and he elaborates how this is done, this procedure. In our times, the leap year is determined through a pre-calculated calendar. And we are still using the calendar that has been determined by the successors of Rabbi Judah the Prince, the author of the Mishnah, and his descendants fixed the calendar until the time when we would resume basing our decisions about the calendar through the decisions of the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. So in the time of the sages of the Mishnah, this was still done by the sages before the fixed calendar. So the decision about whether to have a leap year or not was determined by a variety of factors. It was partly determined by what we need to do is to get the barley crop ripening in the month of Nisan, ready for the barley omer offering on the second day of Pesach. And if the barley crop is not yet ripened, it means that the lunar year of 12 lunar months has gone running ahead the solar year, and we need to put a break on the lunar calendar by adding a month to the calendar. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, B'shloisha maschilin. We start this procedure with 3 rabbis. We're going to call the 3 rabbis who have the requisite knowledge of astronomy. All of the calculations and considerations are set forth by Maimonides, by Rambam in his code, the Mishnah TORAH, in the section of Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, where he states the halachas, in fact, like Rabban Shimon Gamliel. We start the procedure with three rabbis, three sages who understand all the astronomical factors and other factors that are taken into account. And if they see fit, they then expand their panel with a chamisho noisin v'noisnin, with 5 dayonim, 5 judges. We're going to have noisim v'noisnim, masa umatan, negotiations. We're going to discuss. It was not always so clear when the calendar should be intercalated. And they would have a discussion involving many different astronomical factors and seasonal factors. V'goimrim b'shiva, if they determine that it has to be a leap year, they would ideally have the court of 7 judges. And then the Mishnah continues, Ve'im gomru b'shloisha mu'uberes. However, if they completed the discussions with just 3 judges, the year is indeed intercalated. They have the authority to intercalate. What that means is that according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the letter of the law is actually 3 judges will be sufficient to make this decision. However, ideally, they would have a more authoritative panel of 7 to show everybody there's absolutely no doubt whatever about the matter. So now we shall continue for the next few minutes with the 3rd Mishnah of Tractate Sanhedrin. We now come to Mishnah Gimel of the 3rd Mishnah of Perek Aleph, chapter 1 of Sanhedrin. Smichas Zakenim. This means the smicha is the laying on of hands of the elders. This would apply in the case of a sacrifice that is mentioned in Book of Deuteronomy, in the case of the various sin offerings, and where some matter had been hidden from the Sanhedrin and they had to bring a temple offering of atonement for their sin, they would have to lay the hands on the animal. Here says our Mishnah, there would have to be 3 sages. Another possible interpretation of this Mishnah, as Bartanura tells us, Smichas Zakenim, he says, first of all, Al Rosh Par Helem Dovel Shel Tzibur, where the cow offered for something concealed from the community. That is the first interpretation of the word Smichas Zakenim. V'yesh b'mashmur zadavorim gam minui adayan. Also included in the interpretation of these words is the appointment of the dayan, the judge. Shehagodl asumich tzorish shitzoref imoi shnayim ksheroitza lismoich hocham kedei shikore rabbi. For the gadol, a great sage who wishes to ordain somebody, must join with himself 2 other ordained judges when he wishes to give smicha, give ordination to some sage, in order that that sage will be allowed to be called rabbi. V'yodun dine knossos, such a rabbi who had this smicha would be empowered to adjudicate in cases of the biblical fines, like the double payment for a case of theft and the various fines for rape, seduction, and so on, which are not applied in our times. And continues Rambam, Loshen Smicha, Bartanura, Loshen Smicha, the expression here, Smicha in our Mishnah, laying on of hands, Mishum Dechsiv, it's said in Bamidbar Chof Zayin, chapter 27 of Bamidbar, Vayismoch es Yodav Olav. He laid his hands upon him. Moses laid his hands upon Joshua. To continue now with the words of our Mishnah, other things that are performed in front of different numbers of sages. Arifos eglo b'shloisha. There is a law in Deuteronomy that if a dead body is found outside the boundaries of a town, they measure which is the nearest town to where the body was found. If the murderer is unknown, the sages of that town have to come out and they have to take a young eglah, a cow, and smash its neck with an axe. And all of this is described there in Deuteronomy, how this procedure is conducted. And this would have to be done in front of 3 rabbis. These are the words of Rabbi Shimon, Divrei Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'chamisha, this would be done in front of 5. Again, each rabbi learns out why 3 or 5 based upon analysis of the biblical text. Now we come to aspects of marital law. Chalitza v'hameunin b'shloisha. Chalitza is if a married man died without having children. If he has a living brother, the dead man's wife either must, under biblical law, marry the surviving brother in order to raise a son in the name of the dead husband, or she must go through the ceremony of chalitza, where she removes the shoe of the brother of her dead husband and goes through the formula as described in the Torah towards the end of Deuteronomy, at the end of Parashas Kiseitze. And chalitza and meunin is another marital law relating to an underage girl who was married by her father or mother, and actually her mother or brothers. It's a young girl who was married underage, and she is allowed to just refuse to be with her husband without any need for a bill of divorce, a get. So these 2 procedures, chalitza of the levirate marriage and meunin of an underage girl, can be performed in front of 3 judges. Neta ravoy Umayser Sheni, she'ein dom of Yuduin. Here we're in agricultural law, and neta ravoy is the fruits of the vine of the 4th year, the fruits of the land of Israel, which cannot just be used by the owner of the fruits. The first 3 years, the fruits are orlah. Orlah is not allowed to be consumed at all. It's only from the 4th year on that the fruits can be consumed. But the fruits of the 4th year have to be taken up to Jerusalem to be eaten in purity in praise of God, or redeemed with money. And you will therefore, if you do want to redeem the fruits and take the money to Jerusalem, you need a professional assessment of the value of these fruits. The same with Meiser Sheni, the second tithe. We shall be dealing with the details of the tithes when we come to agricultural law, but the second tithe on a farmer's produce had to be taken up to be eaten in Jerusalem by the farmer and his friends, or redeemed with money. And if you don't know the value, she'ein dom of Yuduin, if there's no obvious market value of the produce, b'shloisha, this has to be assessed by a panel of 3 experts. Ha'hekdeshois b'shloisha, hekdesh is something that a person donates to the sanctuary. Well, the sanctuary, what is the sanctuary going to do if people give all kinds of vases and jewels and ornaments to the temple? In many cases, if they have no actual use in the temple will sell them, and the temple can only sell them if there is an assessment of their exact monetary value. There needs to be a panel of 3 judges. Ho'arochin amitaltalin b'shloisha. Arochin, we find at the end of the book of Leviticus that a person can say, well, I would like to give the value of this or that item to the temple, or this or that person to the temple. Well, when a person offers to give the value, the erech of a particular person to the temple, the amount that has to be given monetarily is determined by the scriptures themselves in the end of Leviticus. But if it's the case of some object where the person says, I want to assess the value of this object and give the monetary value to the temple, that assessment has to be made by 3 people. That is in the case of objects of the kind I've mentioned, ornaments, vases, and other precious possessions. Rabbi Yehuda Omer echad mehen kohen. Rabbi Judah says one of the three must be a priest. There is an interest, since this touches on temple law, that one of the panel has to be a priest. Another form of erechin, of evaluations, where the monetary value will be given to the temple, is the very last words of our Mishnah, Mishnah 3 of Sanhedrin, chapter 1, hakarkos, lands, where a person says, I would like to give the value of this field, this estate to the temple. This is going to have a panel of 10 people. Tisho v'chohen. There's going to have to be a panel of 9 judges plus 1 kohen. V'odam kayotze v'ohen. A man too, if a person is assessing, giving the value of a person to the temple fund, that assessment would have to be made in the same way. A panel of 10 people, and one of those 10 has to be a Kohen. And with this, my dear friends, we complete our study of the Mishnah of Sanhedrin, chapter 1, the completion of the second Mishnah of Sanhedrin. And we shall be continuing with this class in just a very few minutes with the final segment, when we'll have some words of Rabbi Nachman. Shalom, back again now for the third segment of today's study, and I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. What a great pleasure it is to have the privilege to be able to say words of Torah, both from the Tanakh and now from Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, as we've just had from the Tanaim, from the Mishnah. Every day we have this wonderful, nutritious diet of Mikra, Mishnah, and Gemara. We have the Mikra, the words of the Tanakh. We have the Mishnah, and Chassidut and Kabbalah, also Gemara. And hopefully we shall all become masters in all of these three areas. And today, in honor of the portion of Pinchas, which is being read in the diaspora communities this Shabbat, I've chosen to study a short section from the writings of Rabbi Nachman in his seminal work, Likutei Moharan, where he's going to use the story of Pinchas getting up and killing the sinful prince of the tribe of Judah and the Midianite woman with whom he was engaged in copulation, in order to throw light on some of the conflicts that take place in our world between even different outstanding rabbis who suddenly find that other rabbis get up against them, as indeed happened to Rabbi Nachman when the elder Hasidic leader known as the Zayda of Shpola, the grandfather of Shpola, the old man from Shpola, one of the oldest of the surviving students of Baal Shem Tov in the time of Baal Shem Tov's great-grandson, Rabbi Nachman, at the end of the 1700s, beginning of the 1800s. The Zayda of Shpola got up and made a huge machloket, a huge controversy against Rabbi Nachman. This had happened prior to this in the time of Baal Shem Tov and his followers, when the Gaon of Vilna, Rabbi Eliyahu, Rabbi Elijah, the luminary, the Gaon of Vilna, got up and came out against the Hasidic movement. It had happened in Italy a century earlier, in the time of Baal Shem Tov, in the early 1720s, against Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, now universally accepted as the outstanding Kabbalist and moralist. Well, now, Rabbi Nachman tells us in Likutei Moharan, part 1, teaching 241, when dinim, when harsh judgments are resting against a person, the divine attribute of severe judgment could completely destroy the person, God forbid. However, the attribute of justice is not given the power to completely destroy and eliminate the person, as our rabbis have taught. Our rabbis in Talmud Sota Daf Tes, they taught that when God threatened to send against Israel his arrows, the arrows would cease, but the people could never cease. There was a physical limit to the number of arrows God might fire against his people, but the people themselves would never, ever cease. That is when the dinim, the harsh judgments, are coming from heaven. However, says Rabbi Nachman, a person, Adam, a person has the power to completely destroy another person. As we see, people can kill others, they can totally destroy people's reputations, God forbid. And therefore, as a consequence of this, if there's a particular person that is subject to severe divine judgment, God forbid, and along comes somebody else and stands up and goes into opposition against that person, this opposition from the human now leads to the divine attribute of severe judgment leaving the first person, because they would much prefer that the Adam, the person, should take vengeance on this individual who is subject to judgment, because the Adam, the person, has even greater power than the divine force of judgment. Actual person in flesh and blood can do something very terrible. And for that reason, somebody who is a great tzaddik, who is constantly looking at the world to see what can he do for the repair of the world, the tikkun olam, sometimes he will intentionally go into opposition against another tzaddik, another righteous person, in order to remove from that other tzaddik the attribute of judgment that is hanging over him, because the forces of judgment will depend upon this tzaddik that's going to go into opposition against the other, that he will take a greater vengeance. But afterwards, this tzaddik who goes into opposition against that one over whom the judgments are hanging, he conducts himself with compassion and mercy, and in fact causes no actual suffering to the tzaddik against whom he came out in opposition. And now Reb Nachman turns to explain this in terms of the act of Pinchas. This will help us to understand Pinchas ben Elazar, Pinchas son of Elazar. God says at the beginning of the portion of Pinchas, it was Pinchas that turned back my wrath through Pinchas zealously pursuing the vengeance among them so that I did not destroy them. So this is at the beginning of Numbers chapter 25. And Reb Nachman explains in terms of what he has just told us, Pinchas was able to turn back the wrath of Hashem and remove the attribute of severe judgment from Israel in virtue of his clothing himself in vengeance to take the vengeance on the people, namely against the prince of the tribe of Judah. And for that reason, he was able to cause the divine judgment to go off the people. The divine judgment did not hit the people as it might have done had Pinchas not done what he did. And this is because the divine judgment, as we heard earlier, could not do all the damage it might have wanted to do, and therefore, once more, that a person, in this case Pinchas, would go and take the vengeance. And thus, the verse at the beginning of the portion of Pinchas says, Lo cholisi es bnei Yisrael b'kin osi. I did not destroy the children of Israel. Namely, the Torah here informs us of the great goodness that Pinchas did to the children of Israel. When Pinchas became zealous out of zeal for God, and it was Pinchas who took the vengeance into his own hands to take vengeance against the prince of the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Shimon, and the Midianite woman, instead of letting the divine hand possibly go and destroy many Israelites. This way it was just the prince of the tribe of Shimon and the Midianite woman. And through this, Pinchas did them a great favor, and the reason is that, as the verse says, the favor was that God, in his words, I have not destroyed the children of Israel through my zeal, namely through the zeal of the divine attribute of judgment. I did not destroy Israel, and the reason is because this attribute of judgment cannot thoroughly destroy, but when a person takes vengeance, he has the power to destroy completely. And therefore, Pinchas did a wonderful favor to Israel in garbing himself in zealousness in order to take vengeance on the perpetrators. In other words, if it had been the divine hand, perhaps the perpetrators would have got sick, they would have got pestilence. But when Pinchas actually went and killed them, this was a greater destruction. And by killing just the two of them, he took away the divine wrath from the whole people who had been standing by watching helplessly and didn't do anything. When Pinchas did it, he averted the divine wrath from the whole people. Because through Pinchas' act, the power of the harsh judgments became softer on Israel, because they saw that Pinchas was going to take vengeance even more so, and Pinchas, being a human being, had the power to take the ultimate vengeance here. And this was how Pinchas was able to turn back the wrath of God and remove the power of judgments. But in fact, despite the fact that Pinchas killed the prince of the tribe of Shimon and the Midianite woman, despite this, he was truly, concludes Rabbi Nachman, Pinchas was truly Rahman. He was a person filled with loving kindness. And most certainly through his act of zealousness, he was able to remove the harsh judgments from upon them. So with that, my dear friends, we conclude today's study, and we conclude this week of Azamra Kollel. And with the help of God, I'll be back here next Sunday at the same time, and same time in each of the different locations. So please consult Azamra schedule next week. With the help of God, we will have sessions on Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And with the help of God, that will be our regular schedule, unless otherwise notified. I will shortly be putting up on Azamra website, on the Avram's tent page and the email subscription page, a form to enable you to subscribe to the Kollel mailing list. And this way, I will notify you about coming classes and any changes in the schedule through your email. They will always be posted on the Azamra site, the schedule for each week and the subject content of the classes. But if you would like to subscribe to the Kollel email list, which will be going up shortly and should certainly be available by next Sunday's session, then you will get this information in your email. And that way, if there do have to be any last-minute changes to the schedule, you'll be able to find out about them. In the normal case, God willing, the archived video recording of the class will be available on my YouTube channel, to which there is a link on the main Avram's Tent page on the Azamra website. And also, I'm posting there audio MP3s of the of my classes in Daniel and in Mishnah. So feel free to use those for review purposes. And with the help of God, I pray that these will turn into an archive of commentary and discussion on our Tanakh and our Mishnah. So my dear friends, I would like to wish you Shabbat Shalom U'Vorach, a good and a blessed Shabbat, and look forward to being with you, God willing, after Shabbat. Shalom from Yerushalayim. Shabbat Shalom U'Vorach.
Shalom.